Hey, this is Chris with Hi-Lux Optics. I'm happy to announce that we finally have the new mounts for the Malcolm 8 Power in stock. In this video, we're going to look at a brief overview of some of the features and highlights of the new mounts, and we'll do a quick comparison with the old ones. So these new mounts we've indexed for quarter MOA if you space the front and rear mounts 7.25 or 7.25 inches from center to center. If you dial the elevation turret counterclockwise and see the numbers go up, your point of impact will go up as well. For the windage turret, similarly, if you dial the windage turret counterclockwise, your point of impact will go right. So just remember, the numbers go up, your point of impact will go up. The numbers go up on the windage turret, and your point of impact will go to the right. A cool feature about these that are not found on the original Unertl mounts is that you can actually re-index these turrets for your zero. So once you get your rifle zeroed, you can loosen the top screw and re-index the turret so that the zero on the turret reflects your zero on your rifle. Now let's get to that quick comparison. So these are the Lyman style mounts on our Malcolm 8 Power scope. While they are accurate, if you space the front and rear mounts 7.25 inches from center to center, there is a little bit of play in the turret in between clicks. Now we've had shooters that can't parry shoot fantastic scores with this mount, but in the heat of the competition, it can be it is possible that you may lose count of your clicks. All right, now let's get to the quick comparison. So as you can see, if you're trying to do a gross adjustment, it is possible that the clicks can slip a little bit, especially if you're dialing them really quick. And because this turret has 50 clicks and only 25 index markers, sometimes the indicator line will be in between, and it might be hard to tell which click you're on. Now let's fast forward to this mount. On the new mounts, there's only 25 clicks per revolution, so there's absolutely no chance that you're going to lose what click you're on. Let's take a listen. That's much better. If you're at Camp Perry and shooting vintage sniper, you'll absolutely clean the 600-yard targets with this mount. So we actually had the fortune of shooting with Dennis at the Burbank Rifle and Revolver Club the other day, and he had one of these mounts that he was testing on his Model 70 Winchester.
So it's ready. Take a shot. These are 1/68 hand loads. Go ahead.
And I actually learned something that day. So he had the rifle zeroed perfectly for him. And when I got on the rifle, the first shot I took was actually a little bit high. And I was a little confused. I'm used to shooting modern scopes where everything is encapsulated within that outer scope tube. But because everything here is exposed, every minor detail comes into play, such as your cheek height, your eye position, all that.
Technically, every time you change the scope's position, your head is actually moving in relationship to where it should be in the center of the scope. Okay.
The first shot I took, even though it was perfectly zeroed for Dennis's eye, my first shot hit the top of the 9 ring. I made some adjustments, brought it down, and I shot my first group over here, solidly in the 9 ring. Made about 2 clicks on windage, and brought it in a little bit closer, shot my next group, and then made the final adjustment and was finally able to get in the center of the X ring.
I took it out, and I did the Mike Sexton test, which was you fire it, you figure out where it's initially grouping, and the test is okay. It says you come up that much, you make that dial, you fire again, and you see whether or not it goes in the X ring, and yeah.
So these mounts, they work really, really well. And you just have to be really consistent with your shot. Make sure you pull the scope back after every shot and line up the crosshairs. Okay. All right, for the next segment, Scott's going to demonstrate how you take off the old mounts on your Malcolm 8 Power scope and install the new ones.
Hey there everybody. So we're going to go ahead and swap out, actually we'll start with swapping this entire old scope onto this rifle. That way I can walk through with you step by step how to replace these mounts with the new ones that you're going to be receiving in the mail pretty darn soon. First thing to take a look at, inside this package you got your front mount, your rear mount, a little set of gizmos and doodads, and the most important piece of all, this new tool that we've made to actually fit in these thumb nuts so that you guys don't have to crank them with pliers, screwdrivers, or whatever else you all have been using so far. Let's go ahead, check this out. If your scope has been mounted on your rifle for a very long time, there's a good chance that at this point it's a little stuck together. This makes the job a lot easier. Although, having to do this with the scope facing the camera is also a little odd. Let's get this out of the way. Put our old scope on here. And like every competition legal setup, I don't have the spring installed, but when we're replacing these mounts and we get to the stage where you can put the spring in or take the spring out, I'll let you know once we get to that point. For this setup, I'm not going to be dealing with the spring simply because, well, it's not going to be involved in the competition. So we start using this handy little tool, fit it into the grooves, loosen it up. That one's nice and loose. And again, yours may be a little stuck, but please don't use pliers. We've already damaged enough of these ourselves. I think it might be time to replace the cross bolts in these. They're getting a little worn. One important thing to take note of, this scope, because of how the reticle is fastened in here, once I remove this ring, once these screws are out on this little circle that has the number 8 on it, don't tilt it more than 45 degrees. You turn it like this, there's a good chance that where the reticle is fastened is going to fall out. Now you can put it back in, but it's better just not to have to worry about it at all. So we're going to keep this vertical while we're switching out the mounts. Let's start with easy step 1. Remove the eyepiece. There's a lot of threading on this, and I haven't decided if I'm going to be fast forwarding through this part of the video, but bear with me. There we are. After that, the lock ring. Again, a lot of threading on this one. Next, we're going to remove the reticle locking frame. And for that, we got to use this little Phillips screwdriver to take out 2 screws. Please don't lose them. They are very small. Okay. Then we slide this reticle frame off of here. If you look inside, you'll notice that where those screws are fastened gives your reticle a little bit of play side to side. If I were to tilt this and look down the tube, that means that I could rotate the reticle to get it level. In the future, if you need to level your crosshairs out, that's exactly how you'd go about it. But you don't even need to remove this when you're doing that. Just loosen the screws, turn it until it's level, and then go ahead and tighten them back up. Next stage, I'm going to back the turrets way up. That way it's loose. Slide that right off. These are the lock rings for when the scope is moving back and forth under recoil. This one sets the limit on how far forward the scope is going to drift. This is where you're going to be pulling the scope back into battery. This is a very important one, and we're not going to need to adjust this at all when we're changing the mounts. Don't worry, you get to keep your eye relief. Let's go ahead and loosen this up. Oh my. If it's tight like this one has become tight over time, you go ahead and loosen up the screw on this side as well. Oh my. Turns out I have to loosen it a little bit more. It has been literally years since we've changed these on this particular scope. Now, front ring off, and we're back to the basics. Now it's time to put the new scope mounts on the scope tube. Let's go ahead. Start with this front ring. Coming from the package, you've got your blocks in there. I already have the blocks on the rifles, so I'm just going to set these aside because I don't really need them right now. The thumb screw is already set to go to the proper depth in order to lock on to these blocks. If you have to change it, please follow along in our video about setting up the exact thumb screw depth and everything of that sort, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and gloss over that part. Next up, a bit of the hardware that goes in underneath this cap comes in the bag separately. We're going to put that in now, or actually, there's a few ways to go about putting the front ring and the rear ring onto the scope tube. I like using the method that does not scratch it up very much. You could go ahead and put this little spring, or the little bit stronger spring, on top of this plunger that slide on the rail. I'm going to do that once I have the front ring on, that way I'm not scraping this all the way along the scope tube body. Drop that on like so. Now, to get the plunger and the spring in place, just got to take this cap off here. Put the guide for the pope rail in the right orientation. Drop that spring in. Then put the cap back on. It's got a lot of pressure in there. So make sure you've worked out your fingers before you go ahead and start this. Tighten that up. Front mount is ready. The rear locking ring, that goes on just like we had done previously. I'm not going to set the position for this one yet because personally I want to replace this screw. You can do that at any point. I'm just going to leave this loose as a reminder to myself. Now, the rear mount. Ooh, I'm excited. It's got that new CNC oil smell on it. Something I miss. Again, this is going to come with the block. We're just going to take that out. I'll keep these aside later if I ever need them, but for now, because I already have one on the rifle, I'm not too concerned about it. There are a few different ways to put this on. You can slip a few pieces of paper underneath the turrets. That way, when you slide it down, you're not going to be scraping this spring-loaded plunger up against the side of the scope tube. Personally, I do the same technique here that I do on the top of that pope rib guide. I'm going to go ahead and back this out. Making sure not to mix up my springs. There we are. Oh, good point. I'm looking at this thing backwards. So, there we go. Looking at it, you should have your windage over to the right, your elevation on top. Your elevation should line up here with your pope rib. Once you get it on the blocks, everything will actually line up, but for here, because it's mobile, I just want to get it a little roughly in place. Drop the plunger in there, drop the spring in here, put the cap back on, and this one is even stronger than the previous one, so make sure you got it lined up before you thread that in. Tighten that up. Very nice. Now let's go ahead and put the lock ring back in place for our crosshairs. Go ahead and line the screw holes back up, and as long as you haven't dropped it, your level should still be exactly the same. Use your Phillips head screwdriver, get that settled in. Those screws really are small. There we are. Set your eyepiece lock ring back there on the threading. Much easier putting it on than taking it off. Put your eyepiece back on. I'm going to leave this loose for now so that I can go ahead and get my fast focus back in place later. I'm just going to go ahead and lock that a little bit. Now we can tilt it because this reticle is tied back in. Go ahead and put that on the blocks. And then again, this fancy little tool is built to go exactly there. Tighten you. Tighten you. Ready to start shooting.